Preston, a $58 million pharmaceutical empire, and our family's 12-bedroom mansion overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The house where I grew up but never belonged, with its marble floors that echoed every footstep and windows so tall they made you feel small. My sister Bianca got his collection of 17 luxury cars, including the cherry red 1967 Ferrari 275 GTB that he spent more time polishing than he ever spent talking to me. Each car was worth more than I'd make in a decade studying marine life off the California coast. And me? Dalton Mercer, the family disappointment who chose to study fish instead of finance. The son who became a marine biologist instead of a businessman. I got a sealed white envelope that made everyone in that mahogany-paneled room burst into laughter. Preston actually doubled over, his Armani suit creasing as he wheezed between breaths. Bianca covered her mouth with her manicured hand, trying to look sympathetic while her eyes danced with amusement. Even Mr. Quentin Hale, our family lawyer who'd handled my father's affairs for 30 years, couldn't hide his pitying look as he handed me that pathetic envelope. But when I opened it that night in my studio apartment, sitting on my second-hand couch with a glass of cheap whiskey in my hand, there was just one word inside, written in my father's distinctive handwriting, truth. Below it, an address I had to read 3 times to believe was real. Zimmermann Private Bank, Bahnhofstrasse 12, Zurich, Switzerland. The next morning, I stood in front of that bank's marble entrance, jet-lagged and confused, clutching my envelope like a lottery ticket I wasn't sure I wanted to cash. The security guard took one look at my name on the visitor's log and immediately called someone. Within seconds, a distinguished older gentleman appeared, his gray eyes studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Mr. Dalton Mercer," he said in accented English, extending his hand. "I'm Roland Zimmermann. We've been waiting for you for 17 years. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about my father, Vernon Mercer. The man who built an empire. The man who treated love like a business transaction. The man who kept me at arm's length my entire life, criticizing every choice I made, dismissing every achievement that didn't involve profit margins or stock prices. Turns out, Vernon Mercer wasn't even his real name. And that envelope everyone laughed at? It was the key to understanding why my cold, calculating father had spent 40 years playing a role that destroyed his relationship with his youngest son. He didn't leave me out of his will because he loved me least. He left me out because I was the only one he could trust with the truth about who he really was, what he'd really built, and why everything my brother just inherited was built on a foundation of lies. My name is Dalton Mercer, and this is the story of how a single word in an envelope brought down a pharmaceutical empire and finally showed me who my father really was. I sat in my beat-up 2008 Honda Civic outside the Mercer estate, watching the October rain streak down my windshield. The mansion loomed ahead like something out of a Gothic novel, all stone and ambition. 32 rooms that held 32 years of my life, and not a single moment where I felt like I belonged. The will reading was in 20 minutes, and I already knew how this would end. Preston would get everything that mattered. Bianca would get everything that sparkled. And I would get what I'd always gotten from Vernon Mercer. Disappointment wrapped in disapproval. The last time I'd been here was 6 months ago, 2 weeks before Vernon's heart attack. We'd argued, like always in his study that smelled of leather-bound books he never read, and Cuban cigars he wasn't supposed to smoke. "You're 32 years old, Dalton," he'd said, not looking up from his quarterly reports. Preston was running 3 departments by your age. Bianca had already married into the Ashford fortune. And you're studying fish migration patterns off the Santa Barbara coast. Marine ecosystems, Dad. I'm researching how climate change affects marine ecosystems. You're wasting your potential counting plankton while your brother builds an empire. He finally looked at me then, his gray eyes cold as winter steel. Your mother would be ashamed. That was Vernon's favorite weapon, invoking my mother, Judith, who died when I was 15. The truth was, she would have been proud. She was the one who bought me my first marine biology book, who took me to the Monterey Bay Aquarium every summer, who told me that the ocean had secrets worth discovering. But Vernon had rewritten her memory to suit his narrative, the way he rewrote everything. I forced myself out of the car and walked toward the house. The front door was still that imposing slab of imported mahogany, with the brass knocker shaped like a roaring lion. Preston opened it before I could knock, his smile sharp as a surgical scalpel. "Dalton? Surprised you could make it. How's the aquarium treating you?" He knew damn well I worked at a research facility, not an aquarium, but Preston had always been good at diminishing people with a smile. "It's a marine research center, Preston. We're doing important work on coral reef restoration." Right, saving the fish." He clapped me on the shoulder with fake brotherly affection, his Rolex catching the light. "Come on, everyone's waiting in Dad's study. Quentin says this won't take long." The house hadn't changed. Same marble floors that Mother used to dance across in her socks when Vernon was away on business. Same chandelier that cast rainbow patterns on the walls during sunny afternoons. Same family portraits lining the hallway, a chronological lie about our perfect family. In every photo after Mom died, Vernon stood at the center, Preston to his right, Bianca to his left, and me slightly behind, slightly out of focus, like the photographer knew I didn't quite fit. Bianca was already in the study, perched on the leather sofa like a cat who'd found the sunniest spot in the house. Her husband was on speakerphone from Dubai, where he was closing some real estate deal that would make them even richer. "Dalton, darling," she air-kissed me, careful not to smudge her lipstick. "You look tired. Are you eating enough? I know how expensive food is when you're living on a researcher's salary." "I'm fine, Bianca. Of course you are." She smoothed her designer dress, a little black number that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Daddy always said you were too proud for your own good." Mr. Quentin Hale entered then, carrying a leather portfolio that looked as old as he was. He'd been Vernon's lawyer since before I was born, a man who knew all our family secrets and kept them locked behind professional discretion and billable hours. "Let's begin," he said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Your father was very specific about how this should proceed." We arranged ourselves like actors in a play we'd rehearsed our whole lives. Preston in Vernon's chair behind the desk, already claiming his throne. Bianca on the sofa, diamonds glittering on her fingers like tears she'd never shed. And me by the window, looking out at the garden where Mom used to grow roses, now replaced by a Japanese rock garden that required no maintenance, no care, no love. "Vernon Mercer's last will and testament," Quentin began, his voice dry as old paper. "Executed 3 years ago and unchanged since that date." 3 years ago. Right after I'd turned down Vernon's last offer to join Mercer Pharmaceuticals. The day I'd chosen my own path over his empire. The day he'd looked at me like I was already dead to him. Mr. Quentin Hale cleared his throat and began reading in that measured tone lawyers perfect after decades of delivering both fortunes and devastation. "I, Vernon Mercer, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." The rain outside had turned into a steady downpour, drumming against the windows like impatient fingers. Preston leaned forward in Vernon's chair, his hands steepled in front of him the same way our father used to sit during board meetings. "To my eldest son, Preston Mercer," Quentin continued, "I leave the entirety of Mercer Pharmaceuticals, including all holdings, patents, and subsidiary companies, valued at $58 million. Additionally, I leave him the Mercer family estate, including